Sunday morning in KwaZulu Township on the outskirts of Port Elizabeth. A group of unemployed people gathers in a community hall. Most of them lost their jobs in the motor industry in the 80s after going on strike. This is an ANC stronghold, but they are so desperate they've called in the help of the opposition.
And from 1986 up to now, you are unemployed. You approach government, including the Minister of Labour, the Director General of Labour, the Deputy Director Generals of Labour. You've approached COSATU. You've approached various other organizations to get help, and you didn't get this help. Is that right?
Yes. At the moment, there's little hope of finding help in economically depressed Port Elizabeth. Unemployment is as high as 70%. But if this billboard is to be believed, there's hope on the horizon. A multi-billion rand project is already in its first stages. Local people are hoping it could be the answer to their problems.
Jy moet nie bang wees nie, want daar's 'n rivier wat nou gebou raak. En die rivier, daar's mense wat nog van ver af kom.
The Coega River is 20 kilometers from Port Elizabeth. The plans are for a deep water port that will accommodate the world's biggest ships. Alongside it, an industrial area stretching over 17,000 hectares. The idea is that private operators will build factories here to make the area ideal for exporting. Known as an Industrial Development Zone, or IDZ, companies producing here will have immediate access to a port. There are even long-term plans for an international airport. The government has appointed the Coega Development Corporation to implement the project. The CDC is a private company. Its board of directors is headed by Mos Nguasheng, former economic advisor to the president. Its CEO is Pepe Selinga, while Raymond Hartle is the communications manager. They are rather vague about the cost of the project.
You would be looking at around 2.1 billion rands. There may be other infrastructure components which would complete the value chain, like, for instance, rail that links with the rest of the other industrial parts of the country. So it also depends on how macro you want to look at the whole thing.
Originally, the industrial zone was to be centered around a zinc refinery to be built by Billiton, formerly Gencor. But the mining company got cold feet and backed out. Even incentives like cheap electricity couldn't entice Billiton, and it decided instead to spend its dollars elsewhere. So Coega was without an anchor tenant, vital, say some, to any mega project. Clouds hung over the proposal. Then, in 1998, new life was breathed into Coega by the arms deal, which government entered into with a number of international consortia. The deal went along the lines of, we'll buy 30 billion rands worth of armaments, but in return, you should supply us with 100 billion rands worth of direct foreign investment. It was decided that several billion of this would be made available to the Coega project. Germany's Ferrostahl said it would build a stainless steel mill as part of the offset arrangement, tied to the purchasing of naval submarines. Port Elizabeth heaved a collective sigh of relief, and it was all systems go.
In the transport sector, among other things, new investments will be made and restructuring effected in the rail, road, and port infrastructure, including the new port at Coega or Coega. Coega or Coega will be the first industrial development zone to be gazetted in March.
To the Eastern Cape African Chamber of Commerce, Coega had finally become a reality.
Our president, during his opening speech in Parliament, he actually endorsed Coega, saying it's going ahead and actually kickstarting the project itself. And I don't think the president would risk and pronounce that kind of announcement on Parliament, knowing very well that there's a risk involved. I don't think he would do that.
Others aren't so sure. One of them is Boyce Papu. He grew up here in PE's New Brighton township. Now he's the director of the Southern African Environment Project. Although based in Cape Town, he finds himself in PE a lot these days, and not only to savour the sheep's head he's so fond of. He's become obsessed with Kucha.
This project actually came at a time when I completed a program funded by the Rockefeller Foundation looking at sustainable development. And when this project was in the newspapers, I said, here's an opportunity to go and apply all these principles of sustainable development that we have learned, because the program was designed in such a way that when you go back home, you have to go and apply what you have learned. So I think Kucha presented that opportunity.
And 4 years down the line, he's come to the conclusion that the Kucha project's sustainability is questionable. There are still no investors. The arms deal hasn't delivered on its offset promises. Ferrostyle is now considering building its steel mill in Gauteng. It makes more economic sense because there's a steel plant in Middelburg. And because there aren't any investors, Portnet, a subsidiary of Transnet, a parastatal, now has to build the harbour. The initial phase will cost 1.65 billion rands, and a further 3 billion has been budgeted, so that yet-to-be-found investors can ship off their wares from the IDZ.
There is no justification, let's face it, there is no justification for coming up with another port, and yet you have two existing harbours, within the radius of 300 kilometers, and then you're going to put one right in the smack of the middle of the others.
The developers see it differently, believing that a port bigger and deeper than PE and East London harbours will attract investors.
And clearly what that does is enable us to speak to investors, give them pretty detailed timeframes about when infrastructure will be developed, what sort of costings ought to be applied to the provision of that infrastructure. And we really are in a process right now of aggressively pursuing a number of investments into the IDZ.
The CDC has entered into an agreement with shipping company P&O Nedloyd to build a container terminal at Kucha. But other shipping lines aren't convinced a new port is a good investment.
The starting point should be to get the existing ports working as efficiently and effectively as possible and to develop those as much as possible. That would be our view, and would certainly be the cheapest route.
But not the chosen route. The IDZ has been gazetted. It's now up to Trade and Industry Minister Alec Irwin to make a decision. He seems to have done that already.
It will be the first of the industrial development zones that we will declare. We'll start construction fairly soon on the harbour. It's a very, very important project. It will help Port Elizabeth. It brings in a lot of new investment and gives us a new deepwater port.
His department has been funding the Kucha Development Corporation. The CDC has received more than 200 million rand so far. This despite the fact that it doesn't have a provisional operator's permit. According to the Manufacturing Development Act of 1993, a company may not begin developing or operating an IDZ without a permit. Yet the CDC has begun moving people off the proposed site. And it has no doubt it will be granted the permit after the IDZ is declared.
The CDC will be the operator of the Kucha Industrial Development Zone, and we will have the permit, both a provisional operator's license as well as the permanent license in the future.
So a private company is being funded by government to do a job that the Department of Trade and Industry admits could be open to any other developer who applies. This has raised the suspicions of Colm Allen. He heads the Public Service Accountability Monitor, based in Grahamstown. The unit follows up cases of corruption in the Eastern Cape and looks at how taxpayers' money is spent. Kucha is keeping him busy.
What we've seen is the creation of a private company in the form of the Kucha Development Corporation, which is wholly funded out of taxpayers' money. We're not aware of a single share that has been purchased in the Kucha Development Corporation by any private source. The Kucha Development Corporation is responsible for encouraging policy decisions which will result in the expenditure at present estimates of around 5 billion rand of taxpayers' money for the creation of infrastructure for a port and an industrial development zone, which we have absolutely no evidence that will deliver any form of sustainable development for the economy of this province.
Therefore, he assumes that this hugely expensive project is being pushed for other reasons, so that individuals can benefit.
The way in which the Kucha project has been explained as being economically viable by numerous politicians and public figures has been through the promise of massive investments from the arms procurement offsets. When you look at the board of directors of the Kucha Development Corporation, that is when, to our mind, a number of alarm bells start ringing. In particular here, I'm referring to Mos Nguasheng, who is the chairperson of the board of directors of the Kucha Development Corporation, who at the time of the conceptualization of the deal and the selection of suppliers and negotiation of the deal and even the signing of the contracts was the special economic advisor to President Thabo Mbeki. So he would have been involved throughout that process, throughout the process of attempting to secure investments which at the time were specifically earmarked for the establishment of an industrial zone.
Another CDC director is Paul Jordan. He used to be Deputy Director General of the Department of Trade and Industry. He was involved in negotiating the arms deal offsets and selecting suppliers. The current Deputy DG, Batle SABC, is also on the CDC Board of Directors. He doesn't see this as a conflict of interests.
It doesn't mean that we'll flaunt the regulations and the ensuring that CDC has the real capacity to deliver on the development. It doesn't preclude any other party like from coming through, but the work that the CDC has put into the process has already demonstrated like its capacity of facilitating the development in the area.
A company chaired by former Defence Minister Joe Modise has been awarded a contract by the CDC. Modise was directly involved in the arms deal. He signed the draft contract for the purchase of the submarines, and tied to this purchase was the building of a steel mill at Kucha. This was used to market the viability of the Kucha project.
Joe Modise is the chairperson of BKS, a company which in turn owns a large share in Kutele Projects, which has been awarded a contract to provide a study of integrated transport systems by the Kucha Development Corporation. You see, were these companies, BKS and Kutele, for instance, involved in a project, and were they being paid out of private investment funds that had come about as a result of the arms procurement offset deal, there would probably still be a conflict of interest then. But the fact of the matter is that they are being paid for their work out of taxpayers' money.
It doesn't end there. Transnet's involvement via Portnet could also be seen as a conflict of interests. Portnet is building the harbour, without which the industrial development zone makes no sense.
So the Kucha Development Corporation, with Mos Nguasheng at its helm, requires an international port purely in order for it to exist as a legal entity. Mos Nguasheng's business partner, Saki Makazoma, was the managing director of Transnet at the time at which the decision was taken to award 1.65 billion rand for the construction of the Kucha port.
Their company, Safika Holdings, has a business partnership with another company, Stuart Scott, which has been awarded 2 contracts by the Coega Development Corporation. The CDC says it has nothing to hide.
You know, one of the questions that we get asked consistently is, who is the CDC? You know, who are the shareholders in the CDC? Who are the directors? The reality is that information is reflected on every letterhead that goes out of this office.
That answer doesn't convince abalone farmer Connie Miller. He runs a multi-million-rand operation along the Coega coast, exporting abalone. He's had numerous clashes with the CDC.
Well, I'm very suspicious because we ask them all the time to give us a share register. And they tell us, they say, look, there's no secrets on who owns the company. You look at the bottom of the letterhead and you'll see. But at the bottom of the letterhead is the directors. Now, we have directors in our company that don't own any shares. I mean, you don't need to own shares to be a director of a company. We are worried that they are using taxpayers' money. They claim government is shareholders, but we don't see that. And then at the end of the day, they start sharing out shares. And taxpayers paid for that. Now, all we want is a share register to show that the government owns 100% of the shares and that there's no chance of that shares changing hands to private people.
We're not doing anything illegal, we're not doing anything immoral, and we have a job to do, which is to deliver this IDZ.
And if they indeed believe that we are acting illegally, why not take legal action against us?
We're waiting for them to make a move. In other words, start their building so that we can interdict them to stop or declare it an IDZ. We'll see what action we take. We've got a very good legal team.
His farm alone is worth 16 million rands, and it's situated right in the middle of the development area. He says because the CDC can't afford to pay him out, he's been told to coexist alongside the project. But environmental assessments say the pollution from a harbour and industrial zone would have a severe impact on the farming of abalone.
Now, we are business, yeah, we bring foreign exchange into the country. We have people that we employ. You know, they still have a pipe dream. They got no customers.
There appears to be no turning back on the Coega project. A haul road has already been constructed to transport rock to build the port. Millions have been spent on surveys and impact assessments to appease environmentalists. Not that it's helped. Environmentalists say it's pointless doing impact assessments unless you know what industries are going to invest in the development zone. Boyce Papu has been spending a lot of time with the community of Coega. They were told to leave the area so that development could begin.
All along, the project has been projected as though all is well. There are no problems, we are taking care of the people, and yet, when we are saying there are problems,
the CDC has promised these people that once they've moved and the project is up and running, they'll be given jobs. Not everyone's convinced.
I'm sure there is a snake in the grass somewhere, but I don't know, but I will try my best to check where the snake is. Because a snake has poison, a snake got made dead.
The Human Rights Commission has accused the CDC of forcibly removing people. Some of them are simply refusing to move. One of them is Nyati Pangalala. He's lived in Coega since 1967. He works at a nearby salt factory, which will also have to move to make way for the development. Some of his neighbours are happy about leaving these shacks because they've been sharing accommodation and have been waiting years for houses. But Nyati Pangalala has been living in a 7-room dwelling here at Coega. He built it himself, with space for his livestock. He doesn't want to move to a 2-room house in an urban area, which is what's being offered to some Coega residents. Like Connie Miller, the abalone farmer, he believes he should be properly compensated.
As jy oor 25 jaar met die grond gaan bly het. Jy het 'n sterke grond daar vir jou jy het sê vir daai plek. Toe sê hy ja. Hulle verstaan nou. Maar van my ek het gesê maar so wat ek nou sê vandag, ek gaan nie eet nie. Ek gaan nie trek nie.
He doesn't think the Coega project will provide Port Elizabeth with enough jobs to replace those being lost in existing industries.
Ek glo nie daar nie. Elke dag as 'n promise. Elke dag as 'n promise. Ek kom nie uit.
The Coega Development Corporation now says the number of jobs the project provides is irrelevant.
Any investor, if the investor is going to create 5 jobs, it's 5 more jobs than what you didn't have.
Professor Stephen Hosking is an economist at the University of Port Elizabeth. Except today, he's checking the marine life off the site of the proposed Coega project. He says there's not enough evidence to show that the project will ever be viable.
Well, at the moment, for a project that is going ahead, they seem to be extremely unsure of the number of jobs that they are going to create. And that in itself is another worrying factor about the project as it stands at the moment. The idea of proceeding with a second port in the Port Elizabeth area is being pursued rather relentlessly in the belief that it will work at some point in time. Whether it's the most efficient or the most poverty uplifting project seems to have been relegated to a secondary issue.
He believes there are better ways to spend money, such as investing in the area's natural beauty. 2 islands off the Coega coast are home to more than half the world's population of African penguins. The Parks Board plans to extend the Addo National Park to the area adjacent to Coega. Not the ideal neighbours for an industrial zone whose byproducts still aren't known. But it's feared that the biggest losers of all could well be South African taxpayers. They're being asked to foot the bill for a multi-billion-rand project which has all the signs of being a white elephant.
So ultimately it's the South African taxpayer then that is taking significant capital risks for projects that only stand at this point in time to benefit private individuals and companies with little benefit to the general public, and in particular the unemployed in the Eastern Cape. We have no guarantee whatsoever of the economic feasibility of this project, and it may well end up being a very expensive 4.65 billion rand ghost on the Eastern Cape coast.